Hi, I'm Elle Wadsworth and I'm a PhD student.
Hi, I'm Dave Hammond, a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Waterloo.
On October the 17th, 2018, non-medical cannabis will be legalized in Canada, only the second country in the world to do so. In order to capture the Canadian policy experience, we have interviewed many stakeholders across the country prior to legalization.
The series will cover how cannabis will be regulated, changes in the cannabis industry, and why Canada legalized cannabis in the first place.
Well, cannabis-impaired driving, very similar to alcohol-impaired driving in that any drug, whether it be alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, any drug, prescription or not prescription, can impair one's ability to drive. And of course, one's ability to drive relies on fine motor skills, gross motor skills, perception, vision, all of those sorts of things. So anything that can impair any of those senses can make one's ability to drive lessened and therefore more dangerous.
So it can impact your attention, it can impact your ability to divide attention. You know, when your reaction time is compromised, you know, you may be able to focus on your speedometer and drive a slow, steady speed, but you may not be able to see the deer that's running across the road or the child that's kicked a ball and is running out in front of it. So there's a lot of complex cognitive tasks involved with driving, and cannabis can impair those tasks. And so that's why we suggest for those people who are using cannabis to don't use cannabis and drive.
Well, currently, I mean, the law for impaired driving is well established, and impaired driving is impaired driving, whether it is by alcohol or a drug. So the laws in this country, we police officers know how to apply them. We utilize them all of the time, and the penalties and the court processes and all of those sort of things, like I said, are well entrenched. As we move forward and we look at December, when Bill C-46 will be fully implemented, those laws are going to change. So it will create new sections in impaired driving and for smoke or for use of cannabis and driving. And you start looking at the number of nanograms that a person has in their system, or a combination of nanograms and alcohol. At roadside, the officer there's going to have to be something that the officer sees or saw in the method or the way the person was driving the vehicle. But they pull someone over, they're going to make observations at the roadside, and the officer is going to be working towards whether or not they have reasonable grounds to make an arrest for impaired driving. Once we move into December and Bill C-46 takes full effect, we'll also have the ability to utilize oral fluid screening devices to test positive or negative for THC in oral fluid, and we can make a demand that the person provide that. What that will do is it will simply add to all of the other grounds that the officer has. It's just one more tool for the officer to form grounds that the person has THC in their system. But it's, as I said, the toxicology of alcohol is very different from the toxicology of marijuana, or cannabis. So the fact that a person tests positive for the presence of cannabis in their oral fluid does not necessarily mean that it equates to THC in their blood, where with alcohol in the breath, it's very much a direct or linear relationship.
If you look at the mortality attributable to cannabis, in Canada at least, a fair amount of it is due to motor vehicle collisions, presumably from impaired driving. So it is an important source of the health burden. We know it impairs people, and the default reaction is to always compare it to alcohol. There are differences between the substances, there are differences to the nature of the impairment. But I would suggest that we do have ample evidence that it certainly can be, it is impairing for many people. And I think that's borne out in the statistics. So it matters because people are getting injured and dying from it. and it appears to be increasing. It's also true that youth and young adults who are most likely to drive high they don't perceive it as that harmful. They perceive it as it's more difficult to tell if a friend is impaired from cannabis than, say, from drinking alcohol. They're less likely to intervene if they think that's the case, and they think they're less likely to be stopped or charged if, in fact, they have been driving after using cannabis. So the whole spectrum of indicators suggests that there's a lot of work to be done. I think there's a need to have a conversation with folks to say, look, this is impairing, it does cause problems, and we really need to work around social norms and saying, look, if you do it, don't get in a car. It's not to say don't do it, but don't get in a car.
It is so critical that perception equals reality. And the reality is that any sort of drug that can impair your ability to operate a motor vehicle safely will make our roads less safe. We already have too many people die or are seriously injured in collisions in this country, and it is absolutely critical that we change that perception, because the most important piece, at least what I've seen in my experience, is we need society to change the way we think. If you look at alcohol and the way that 50 years ago, many people drove drunk, beyond impaired, drunk. And then over time, society changed the way they looked at that. People changed the way they had parties. People stayed overnight. They made smarter choices. They thought about if they're going to go to a party or something and they're going to be drinking, they know they've got to make a smart choice to get home. I'm concerned that we don't have that same feeling about cannabis. We have a new generation of people using cannabis in a more mainstream way that may have the false perception or belief that they aren't doing anything wrong.
The more people become aware, I think the greater the impact we're going to have in terms of reducing rates of drug-impaired driving. It just speaks to the opportunity we have, particularly with legalization, to really come out with some robust public education messages and make sure those messages are sustained. Post Royal Assent, a year or two after the change in legislation, just to really reinforce that message and make Canadians aware that there are risks.
I want to see a more balanced and scientific approach to concerns around driving with cannabis. This is huge. Now, of course, I don't want anybody to be intoxicated behind the wheel. But I think these blanket regulations that we're putting on individuals does not make sense, especially for medical patients. Medical patients, they tend to consume a lot more cannabis. And even if they feel like they are able, capable, sober to drive, there still could be a situation if they take a blood test that they would be over that limit. So how are we dealing with these individuals who are suffering in pain but still need to get around and live their life?
It's important that people understand this idea that they have a medical out, so to speak, or a bona fide medical use of cannabis. It would be the same as taking any other prescription drug that would affect your ability to operate a motor vehicle. You are still impaired. It is still a criminal offense in this country. So whether you have a medical exemption or a medical approval or authorization is not going to matter. If you are impaired by THC and you're operating a motor vehicle, you will be subject to arrest and charge, and the penalties are quite significant.
We don't want to see rates of drug-impaired driving increase on the roads. We want to make sure Canada's roads are as safe as possible. And so the intent with this new legislation is really to give the police more powers, more capacity, more training to address this and increase their enforcement efforts.
We expect an increase. It is the experience of other jurisdictions across the board that those that have published their research and what they have found, there is an increase. It was broadly known going into legalization that this is a problem with legalization, and it was considered by the government, and the law is changing. It's so critical that police, all of our partner agencies, and everyone from mom and pop and kids at parties looking out for each other, and I mean, everyone. We all have a role to play in making sure that people make smart choices. And those smart choices keep us all safe. So we do know what's going on. And we know that we have to be prepared for it. And we have a major challenge in changing that perception. It has been an extraordinary challenge for law enforcement agencies to prepare for this. But as I said earlier, this is not new. The legislation is new. The problem's not new. It might become more exacerbated with legalization, but I mean, this is, what have we been doing? We've been training, we've been lobbying government, we've had a great deal of input at the government level, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have spoken at the Senate level and in government to inform these laws. We've worked closely in partnership with the Ministry of the Attorney General in the development of the laws. There's been quite an extraordinary outroll of training. We've trained 400 standardized field sobriety test qualified officers just in Toronto Police alone. Our training is one of the biggest pieces that we've been doing to prepare for it, and we continue to do that, and we are going to continue to do that as we move forward. It's so important that we get this type of message out as broadly as we can, and particularly in universities and colleges and high schools. And we have a whole generation of people that are going to be brought up in a whole new regulatory regime. This has been illegal up to this point. It's no longer going to be. And as we move forward, it's important that socially we realize the implications of that. And there are impacts on our safety. And it's important. We all love our families. We all love our friends. And every single death on a roadway in our country is both a tragedy and a preventable tragedy. Every one of them is preventable.